Tombstone. Crime ruled the streets. Violence stalked the innocent. And every stranger was your enemy. Until Wyatt Earp and his brothers arrived. And now, all hell is about to break loose.
Hello, and welcome to episode 28 of We'll Review It Ourselves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks, we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection, and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan, and he'll be a daisy if he do. On my left is...
Dan Bergman.
Nice. See how I worked that in there? Because we're talking about Tombstone?
Yeah. Little theatricality in our podcast now.
Yes. Well, I like to keep the people entertained. Interestingly enough, we put out 2 episodes last week. I mean, by the time this podcast records, like during our actual recording, that was last week. When this releases, it'll be 2 weeks from when our listeners will hear it. But yeah, 2 episodes. That was kind of fun.
Yeah, well, can you really say 2 episodes? Because one of them was just like kind of a little, 20-minute blurb.
Well, our part was, the whole episode was about an hour, so, it was kind of cool.
Yeah, okay.
It was a neat touch. It was an interesting little deviation from the norm.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that because we were at 500 downloads, just barely over that, prior to that release. And between those 2, and I guess some people got interested in other episodes, which is awesome, we were able to get nearly another 10% of downloads. So we're at 550 or something like that. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, moving on up.
And it was all within a week, so that makes me happy. We might have to do more of that in the future. Not all the time, just every now and again.
Yeah, it was kind of neat, though. I like the concept of, the preemptive strike. Like, this is something that's definitely going on our shelves. We don't have it. Nobody has it. It hasn't been released, but the money's already spent. We're getting it.
Yes. If I have to take out a second mortgage, no. I need the $47 for the super special Quadra edition or whatever. I will get this movie.
Oh yeah.
That movie.
Oh yes, she will be mine.
But before we start talking about Tombstone, which we'd already sort of alluded to, we have some listener feedback, and I can't believe I missed this. For some reason, I thought that iTunes would send us an email saying you have a review, so I feel bad for putting this in so late, but I did notice it, went back, and this also serves as encouragement to drop those iTunes reviews and share us with your friends, because the way the algorithm in iTunes works, if we get 5 stars and it's similar to what other people are downloading, it makes it a recommendation. So, we might get more listeners that way. But I want to thank listener Teresa316. Her review was dated October 13th, 2017. Again, sorry for the delay, but it was 5 stars and it said, I enjoy listening to them and their occasional guests, which brings up my next point. We haven't had a guest in a while. We might have to work on that.
Yeah, I've had a couple of my friends from here in LA that say they wouldn't mind being guests in this podcast. I mean, I got my one friend who happens to be an immigrant from England. He said if he ever did an English movie that he would love to participate. So what the?
It specifically has to be English?
No, because he's a bit of a movie buff. His is the only other library who rivals mine.
Oh, wow. Well, I did pick up 3 new movies, so trying to play catch up.
Oh, you're getting there. But no, seriously, his I think he out collects me because and I don't mean this in a bad way, but he is less picky. He will collect movies for the sake of collecting movies, whereas I look at a title and it's like, yeah, that title fits me. I'm gonna buy that one.
Fair enough.
So I think his collection is I don't say considerably, but is significantly larger than mine. But I think though it's like when it comes to English made movies, he would bring a definite cultural perspective that we might not be able to highlight.
Something that I would be interested in doing. Not that I wouldn't be interested in having your friend on for any episode.
Oh, I mean, yeah, he would totally be down for like if we did a Marvel. He loves Marvel movies, so
All right. Well, there are certain cultural things that if you watch a movie, unless you're really hip to the British culture, there are references that might be funnier or more poignant or more impactful if you actually knew what they were talking about, as opposed to I think that's what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, no, I'm always a fan of getting a different perspective.
Good.
So, we also got some listener feedback on our Rock of Ages Extended Edition episode from Rob Yunt. I just wanted to let you know why famous people put strange stuff in their rider. It's so when they see it, bowl of green M&Ms, they know it was read and the things they really care about should have been done. And that was on our Facebook page. I did respond back, and it was a little snarky. I thanked him for the info and said that was awesome, but I said on a side note, what if it backfires and the personal assistant or whoever takes care of these things just goes straight for the weird stuff and just handles that and says, they'll think everything's fine after this. And we got some listener feedback on our super special bonus episode on Avengers Infinity War. And it's from one of our favorite listeners, Jeff Edwards, who said, loved your Infinity War episode so much that I went out and saw the movie after deciding to give it a pass. Glad I listened to the episode and glad I saw the movie. They were both excellent. And I let him know, again, what I'd said earlier about, we have to own it kind of rule. But that's why we don't give it a number. It's a super special bonus episode.
Hey, and you know what? MCU should thank us. We gave them a customer. If not for us, they might have gone bankrupt.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that's going to happen.
Every little bit helps.
Yeah, this movie's probably going to break $1 billion this weekend.
This movie can own a small country.
Yes, or two, depending on which one you pick. So that's our listener feedback, and we do want to thank our listeners for that. And at the end of the episode, we will provide you with more ways to contact us. That said, we are talking about Tombstone, 1993. I did not realize this movie was 25 years old.
Yeah, I'm realizing that about a lot of movies.
That is starting to become a thing. You're like, oh.
Oh, well, no.
Yeah, never mind.
I'm getting older.
Do you, and I know we'll get onto the movie, but do you ever stop and think when you were a kid, when your mom or dad started watching a movie on television on, whatever local channel was featuring the latest, whatever movie from the 50s or 60s, they're like, oh my goodness, I haven't seen this movie since it was in the theaters. And now, obviously, we have a vast array of ways to see a movie. But did you ever see these things and go, oh my God, that movie's old? To your parents and make them somehow feel old?
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a number of times, I mean, there was this, it started off innocently enough, but it became a childhood joke about, older movies and everything. And it's like, when I was younger, you can't see that movie until you're an adult. And I'm like, oh, great. It'll be black and white by the time I get to be that age.
Nice. I remember watching some movies at home, and my stepdad would put on an old Western or something, like from the 60s, late 70s, some old Clint Eastwood movies. I was like, oh, my God. Why are we watching this? And you didn't really have a choice because, parents controlled the television, and it was a luxury to have more than one television in the house, so you were kind of stuck, or you just went to go do something else. Mm-hmm. But this movie kind of reminded me of that I'm watching a Western, and the mid-90s was kind of a resurgence of the Western as a genre. If I recall correctly, I mean, The Quick and the Dead came out in the mid-90s. What was that other...
There
Well,
was
obviously
Unforgiven
Tombstone.
with Clint
There we go.
Eastwood and
That's the
Morgan
one I was trying to
Freeman.
think of. Yep. So,
Most notably, there was another. There was a couple of was it Silverado?
yeah,
Um,
there were a number of movies that came out in the '90s that were westerns that were pretty well received and pretty well heavily marketed as far as movies go. So it was a big time for westerns, and this movie is representative of that. And I think the one that, from a viewing standpoint, holds the most reverence, I guess, from people our age.
yeah.
Yeah, but before we really get too far into it, how did this movie get on your shelf?
Well, to be honest, I don't yet own it. This was going to be the okay. I'm going to do a podcast. It's on my wish list, and I'm just going to go ahead and get it so I can do it for the podcast. And I'm having a hard time finding a copy of the special edition that I want in retail. And I like I said, I could have just ordered it on Amazon, but it's like it wouldn't be here in time for a recording. Um, so I don't yet own it. It is one of those things where it's like I've seen it lots of times, and I want to own it, just not yet.
Interesting. I know you'd mentioned when we recorded the last episode that you didn't own it and you were going to use that as an impetus to get it, but I'm kind of surprised that you don't own it.
No, again, like I said, I thought I was just going to be able to walk into any Best Buy or Fry's Electronics and grab it. And, unfortunately, they neither stocks their shelves as well as they used to. And so,
Yeah, probably because you can get it through other means, yeah.
yeah. And, again, that's just my own procrastination thinking. It's like, well, I can just get it the next day or the next day, and it just hasn't happened. So,
Yeah,
my bad,
well.
my fault, mea culpa.
Ooh, Latin. There is Latin in this movie, so it kind of fits.
Yeah, well, I was hoping that would be a segue, but yeah.
I own this movie because, really, Christy wanted it. I mean, I'll be honest, I liked the movie well enough, but it wasn't a thing that I was going out of my way to buy. But she really likes it, so we ended up getting it. It's just the regular old standard in a box DVD edition. There's nothing spectacular about it. In fact, I was reading the back because we generally, try to talk about the special features and stuff. And the special features were French language edition, English subtitles, and theatrical trailer. And I think that was about it. So there's nothing really spectacular about it. Yeah, exactly. But, I own it and threw it in the player this morning and watched it. Took a note here or there and kind of did a little bit of research, which is when I realized that this movie came out, as we mentioned earlier, in 1993, which was, kind of prime movie-going age.
Yeah. So, you expressed here that you didn't quite go out of your way to get it, and you said it is highly regarded amongst people of our age demographic. So, yeah, a lot of people that I know, highly regard this movie. I mean, to them, it's the Ten Commandments, it's Cecil B. DeMille, it's the greatest movie ever to them. Obviously, we have different opinions about it. Westerns have been known to embellish a lot of mythology, a lot of fantasy upon the American West. Did you notice or did you feel that this movie did that, or was this movie trying to get away from that, or was that even something you considered when watching this film?
I did consider it when I was watching it this time. I don't know that I'd ever really done that in the past because before we started this podcast, a lot of the times when I would watch a movie, I was just watching it to be entertained, like, oh yeah, I want to see this movie again or whatnot. And now I'm watching it with a more, I don't want to say critical eye because there's parts of that, but it's bigger than that. I'm watching it from more of a, why do I own this? Why do I like this? Or why do I not like it? Kind of trying to figure out what my hook into this movie is. Mm-hmm. So it occurred to me, and I think that was one of the things that the Westerns in the 90s in particular did try to do, is show more of the inherent violence in the Old West as opposed to the old Roy Rogers notion of the West and that sort of thing. Not that the Clint Eastwood movies didn't do that sort of thing, but this, a little more up to date, a little more, improved interpretation of the events, I guess, but it's also not afraid to show the violence. Although, surprisingly, there was a lot less blood than I remember in this movie that wasn't specifically there to make a statement. They didn't show great big gaping holes in people, except for a couple of times when people got shot in the head. But when when Bill Paxton got shot, the blood was all over Wyatt Earp's hands, and that was just symbolic. I mean, it was the blood, yes, but from a storytelling standpoint, it was more than just blood on his hands. It was the figurative, symbolic nature of it as well. But for the most part, somebody got shot, they just fell over and died. So I don't know that it truly captured the violent manner in which, particularly the old weapons would kill you, because they weren't, precision instruments of death. It was a, God-fearing lead slug that, went in one side and exploded out the other. So
Yeah, that could just as easily go into you sideways as it could,
Mhm.
spiraling through like a football.
Exactly. So I think that this movie softened the violence a little bit and actually kind of romanticized it.
Yeah, and see, and again, that's the thing, It's like this is why I personally did not find this to be the greatest movie ever, as a lot of my friends, because I felt that it still was a highly romanticized vision of the Old West. Good guys were good guys, bad guys were really bad, and if they got killed, justice was served.
Yeah, and sometimes it's more complicated than that.
Oh yeah, and if like I said, later on we'll discuss the historical accuracy of this movie, which just give a heads up, it was actually surprisingly accurate in a lot of manners, but still couldn't escape romanticizing certain aspects, fictionalizing for Hollywood purposes and everything. But it just seems that when I first saw this and everyone said, "Oh, this is a great movie," it's just that, and I used to get caught up in that, the romantic notion of good versus evil, and westerns are, if you study movies long enough, you start to see that it's really difficult to find a really accurate, gritty portrayal of the Old West.
I wonder, though, because nobody really wants to go to a movie and see someone dying for 4 hours. There's a certain part of it that's just, you want the experience of the story. So as far as, like I was talking about earlier, seeing that big giant gaping wound and then watching someone die painfully for hours, that part to me, I mean, I kind of get, but by the same token, it does make it seem like it's just as simple as walking up and going, bang, yay, good guy. So I agree with you. I think there's some nuance in there that's worthy of discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like, because we haven't discussed Saving Private Ryan yet, have we?
We have not.
We have not.
I'm looking forward to that one.
Well, the World War II movie has done a good job of de-romanticizing the notion of why we went to that war and how we fought it. It's done a very good job. I don't think that Hollywood has yet done that to the degree that Saving Private Ryan has done for World War II, that is done for the Western. So I guess the point that I'm really trying to make here is that I think of all those movies that are available, the ones that we've mentioned, I think this is probably the best attempt, I guess you can say. And I
agree with
will
that.
I will give it that. I will give it that this is, looking at it, especially preparing for this podcast, that I think they did put a really good effort into it. Looking at it with different eyes than when I first saw it back in the 90s, and any subsequent time before or after that, and now. I think that this is probably the best attempt that Hollywood has made.
That's a fair assessment. I think that this movie did things that hadn't been done before to a degree. I mean, it did, like you said, go a little farther into the inherent violence. Wyatt Earp is kind of a jackass. When he rolls into town and goes into the Oriental, that was the name of the saloon, right?
Yeah.
The Oriental? Yeah.
So,
He goes in and he pulls out Billy Bob Thornton, who I had forgotten was in this movie. But he pulls him out, and it just freaking smacks him upside the face and clunks him on the head, and that was Western justice. That was the kind of thing that is romanticized today as this is why we don't have discipline in our kids. This is why events are happening. And I don't and I kind of want to make this relevant to today because we're adults now. We have kids, and people in our age group, give or take, 5 to 10 years, watch this movie and they see Kurt Russell's character laying down justice. Somebody doesn't do what is right, then you smack them upside the head, or you club them over the head with the butt of your gun, and then you haul them out, and you've served justice, and then you just stare them down, and everything's right with the world. Again, it romanticizes the interpersonal or the personal interactions that human beings have, and makes it seem like it's just that easy when it's not. People will use this as a rationalization, like, remember when we used to be able to spank our kids and discipline them and all this kind of stuff? And like, I get it. I'm all for disciplining your kids. I really am. Establishing boundaries and ensuring that they understand the difference between right and wrong. But I'm damn sure not going to club them over the head with the butt of my pistol, figuratively, of course. But it doesn't mean that's the way we still have to do it. And I'm not trying to preach to anyone. I'm not trying to tell anyone how to raise their kids. But there's more than one way to skin the hog, if you will, or skin that smoke pistol or smoke machine or whatever the hell he called it. There's more than one way to do a thing, and your way is not always the only way, nor is it necessarily the right way.
I kind of with you on that, I don't want to preach either. This is not the place for it. This podcast is to talk about movies and not necessarily politics and social issues or anything. But I will say that, everybody knows my stance that I don't buy into the movies, music, and video game influence and causing violence in people and everything. But, there is that the fact that a lot of people watch this movie and others like it, and they talk about the good old days, like you said, when we were able to dish out that Western justice, or it's like that. They fantasize of that golden age that really never was. Because if you read about the old West, it's like, somebody upsided their head more times than not. The guy whose head you upsided came back at you. It's like, a stare down didn't quite work out the way you see it in the movies. It's like you a lot of times people didn't even get the chance to have that stare down because the guy came back at you.
Yeah, and that was the thing that when Billy Zane's character came off the stagecoach and looked at Kurt Russell, at Wyatt Earp, and said, his lithe frame, silhouetted by the sun, his steely gaze like a hawk, put that romantic edge on it, gave it that feel that this was to be strived for, when these were 3 guys out of how many people lived in Tombstone? Thousands. And how many thousands of those were just trying to survive? You had the however many red-sashed cowboys there were, but even they were just trying to survive. That's why it wasn't surprising when Michael Rooker's character, again, people I did not know were in the, or did not remember were in this movie.
Yeah, when he was in this movie. He may have been your father, but he wasn't your daddy.
But when he threw down his red sash and said, I will help you, they're not my brothers anymore because they did, the thing that they did, that was a little more, in my opinion, realistic of the way, 1, alliances will shift in real life. 2, look, I was just trying to keep my family safe and secure and do a thing, and this was, I don't want to say it was a job, it was kind of like hiring henchmen in Austin Powers. Like, where do you get these people? Is there like a Craigslist for this? How do you find henchmen? But, a lot of those people were just trying not to get killed or get their family into trouble or whatnot. They're like, whatever, this is a guy doing a thing. I want to do a thing.
Yeah.
So
sometimes it's as simple as it's like, hey man, I do this and I get to eat.
Exactly. Hey, he's providing me food, which opens up an entirely another line of thought that I'm not going to go down because I'm really trying to avoid that kind of thing, as you said, on here, because this is a podcast about movies. But by the same token, one of the things that we have done very well, I think, is discuss how movies relate to real life and how, like Casablanca, even when we talked about that, a 75-year-old movie, how it could still be current in today's age. So the theme of this movie is justice and revenge, and the historical story bits. But obviously, they didn't have tape recorders or video cameras back then, so we don't know exactly the words that were said unless they were quoted to someone, and they were taken down. So, there has to be some liberties taken with the story.
So what is it you were gonna?
Oh, so what I'm trying to get at is, there are some parts of this movie that you could translate even more into current type events that might rationalize certain behaviors by certain people.
Example?
But I'm not going to go there.
Oh, okay. So, no examples. Scratch that.
No, I don't want to.
That's not a can of worms you want to open, huh?
Exactly. I don't want to open that can of worms. So, but I do want to transition to, talking about some of the actors, which I kind of alluded to. I mean, Val Kilmer, I'm not a huge Val Kilmer fan. I've seen him in a few things that I like. I've seen him in some things that I don't like. I liked his Doc Holliday. It was pretty okay. Kurt Russell is pretty handy to have in a Western. He does have that squinty glare that, Westerns are known for. Bill Paxton was good in this movie. He darn sure wasn't yelling and screaming, "Game over, man!" But I think those guys did great. Powers Booth did exactly what he needed to do. I think everyone in this movie was cast very well, so I applaud it for that.
Yeah, Doc Holliday, definitely one of the more memorable characters in movie history. I mean, it's he is among more highly quoted characters in all of moviedom, I should say. I mean, he doesn't make the top 10 as quotable, but he is definitely within the top 100, if not the top 50 of quotable characters. I mean, I don't know how many times I keep hearing people say, "I'll be a Huckleberry." It's just...
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. And I avoided that specifically during the intro, saying, "And my Huckleberry." And I went for the "You're a daisy if you do," which I was actually doing some research, and that's a thing that he is quoted as saying in real life. Somebody heard him say that during that specific moment during a shootout and wrote it down. So that was actually, without getting too far into the historical accuracy, from what I understand, that was actually historically accurate.
I just thought it'd be funny, like, it's like you were saying, yeah, he really did say that, but not quite in the context of the movie. It wasn't during a gunfight. It was when he came out of the outhouse, But he did say that.
Dropped a lung in there. You might want to be careful. Oh. Damn.
Oh my. But yeah, you also mentioned Kurt Russell. I mean, there's an actor, who's just shown a diversity in his ability to play. Yeah, it's like almost like he plays different characters, but always plays the same character.
It's a spin on the same character. I agree. Like his heyday in the 80s and in the 90s. I mean, he's still obviously making movies. He made The Hateful Eight just recently, which is again another Western.
He was Ego in Guardians of the Galaxy.
But Tango and Cash, kind of the same kind of thing, where he's brash, doesn't have the concerted stare down look. I mean, he's a little more animated in that one. But like, go back to Overboard with Goldie Hawn. He was the same kind of dude. He was just the captain of a ship. So, or no, actually, he was a handyman. He wasn't the captain of a ship.
He was the handyman.
I was thinking Captain Ron.
Yeah.
Different movie. But yeah, no,
but
Kurt
still
Russell.
rough
Yeah,
around the edges.
still the same basic kind of, but I think that's the draw. He is the, good looking, kind of, like you said, rough around the edges, but he's the everyman. He's the, I don't know everything, but I know what's right, and I know what I need to do. When he was in, what was that, Executive Decision, the airplane one with Halle Berry and Steven Seagal that I cheered 12 minutes into the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't care. It's an old movie. Spoiler alert. Steven Seagal gets sucked out.
But he's this really smart guy in that movie, and he's put into a position that he's not the kind of guy that should be there. But, like Hollywood, he wins, blah, blah, blah.
I say he's in a tuxedo in most of that movie. He came from a cocktail party.
Mm-hmm.
He gets thrust in with a bunch of special forces guys.
Yeah, and he's doing the, how did I get here? Oh, crap. But it's all because he took a flying lesson at the first part of the movie, and you knew he had to be in there, so.
Yeah. And lucky for us, he was there.
Yes, lucky for all of us.
Yeah.
But in this movie, he does a great job. I tell you, the mustaches in this movie are phenomenal. They were straight out of, to quote President Trump, central casting. They were fantastic. They were like a full head of hair on a human, right on somebody's upper lip. My mustache can only dream of being that spectacular.
Yeah.
Sam Elliott has a phenomenal mustache. I couldn't help but think when he came in after he had already taken the job as the marshal or the sheriff, or I think he was the marshal. Apparently I wasn't paying attention to who was what law enforcement officer. When he became the law enforcement officer, he was Johnny Law. And the thunder and the lightning, the night they attacked the women's house and all that kind of stuff, when he comes in and he's all shot up, I was thinking, oh great, he's going to lie up on the bar and die. Again, yet another Sam Elliott dies on a bar scene. Because I hadn't seen this movie in a while, and I'd kind of forgotten that he didn't die. So it was nice to watch this and kind of re-see the movie and go, oh yeah, that's how that ended up. I mean, I know again it's real life or a historical movie, so it's going to end the way it's going to end. But I'd kind of forgotten. So
Yeah, Sam. That's the thing. Talk about Sam Elliott, man. He's him. And to a larger degree, Kurt Russell, but I mean, him especially, he's the kind of guy that you can't really put him in any other movie where he's not a cowboy of some sort. I mean, even a movie that's so far removed from this one, he's sort of a cowboy figure in The Big Lebowski. He's just
yeah.
that's all he can be.
And I don't want to say it's typecastiness, but he is good at it. He is He's the lone wolf, if you will. He's the older mentor, just, this is the right thing and we got to do the right thing, kind of dude.
And he's got that storyteller's voice.
And he sells me trucks all the time on television, so.
Yeah. But, it's like, whenever you hear the tale of the Old West and everything, it's like, it's his voice for that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Morgan Freeman can tell a narration, no problem, but as far if it's a Western, you got Sam Elliott.
Yeah, it's like that meme that says, who do you want to narrate your life? Or imagine Morgan Freeman narrating your life. And I think, oh, that would be super awesome. But if my life were a Western, I agree with you, I would have Sam Elliott. Because he embodies the voice of the West, as we romanticize it.
So, sticking with the conversation on characters, and let's shift gears a little bit to the villain. Now, Michael Bain playing Johnny Ringo. Now, I guess the only way to approach this is to say, it's like, what do you think? Over the top villain, or just enough villain to be respectable?
I think he was at first.
What at first?
Was over the top at first. But after the whole drunk thing, he seemed to be more about avenging his brother's death. And it was avenging Powers Booth's death. And he was kind of a wild child until he was confronted with the reality of, oh crap, I'm supposed to lead this, gang now or whatever. So I think he started out that way, and then he kind of ended up being a more respectable, decent villain when Doc Holliday had his shootout with him.
Okay, for me, it's like I viewed him as a bit of an over the top kind of villain. Like, oh, really? Were they really bad guys? This bad guy-ish, type of thing. And of course, then you had Doc Holliday to be like the total antithesis of that, and making fun of him. And you see Johnny Ringo twirling his guns. And here comes Doc Holliday. He's twirling his little cocktail cup.
Yeah, in one of the most iconic scenes in movie history, I think.
You think so?
I wouldn't put it in the top 10, but I think in the top 100, and we're talking about 100 years of movie history. I think it's pretty well known, and that could just be because it's something that we do more now as opposed to in the 30s when going to the movies was an event, and that was what you could see when you could see it. It wasn't like you could just watch it on TV, again, like we mentioned earlier, on demand, Blu-ray, 4K, Ultra HD, frickin' streaming, Netflix, Hulu, CBS Discovery, or CBS Go, or blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on and on. And it's only going to get bigger.
So you sure you got them all?
Oh, no. I did not.
Okay.
Because my stupid television keeps telling me, like, hey, you can try X and so, like, but I don't want to. I don't want to try your free monthly service because you're automatically going to start billing me if I don't cancel it, and I don't want to have to remember to cancel it.
That reminds me, I got to cancel my HBO thing on the PlayStation View. Damn.
You're welcome. But I think that the cup twirling scene, and I'm your Huckleberry, and you're a Daisy if you do less so, are Doc Holliday's most memorable scenes in the movie. But one of the most poignant ones that struck me was when the Earps, they're getting ready to go have the shootout at the OK Corral, and Doc comes out, and they say, Doc, you don't have to do this. And it's basically, he said, I never had a friend, or something like that. It was like, oh, I got lots of friends. Like, yeah, I don't. It showed his motivation and why he was doing it, and it was very well delivered. It was just like, yeah, you might have a lot of friends. I don't. So I got to fight with and for the ones that I do have.
Actually, though, that's like that wasn't the OK Corral scene.
That was later on.
It was later on in the movie. They're just having
after Morgan died.
Yeah, it was campfire conversation while they were fighting the cowboys, and he said, "Why are you doing this, man?" He's like, "Because Wyatt's my friend." And it's funny that you mentioned the OK Corral, because actually the line that I liked, and I tend to like things that other people don't, but the line I liked, it was preparation for the OK Corral, and he said, "Hey, you don't have to do this. This is not your fight." And his thing's like, "Well, Wyatt, that's the rudest thing you've ever said to me." It's like, that to me was a great line. It's like, how dare you?
I do think, though, in the description they talk about Doc Holliday as a Southern gentleman. I do think that Val Kilmer's accent could have been a little more Southern as a Southern gentleman. It was okay, but I think that was kind of a weak area for me.
It's funny that you bring up the whole thing of accents or anything, because it's something that I've been paying a little bit more attention to in both movies and video games, is the accents that they tend to use for characters. And it's kind of right now, it's kind of a running joke. I think I mentioned on our Facebook group and everything about how it's just like, no matter where you are, if you're dealing with a foreign person, they always have an English accent. I mean, Assassin's Creed Unity was supposedly during the French Revolution in Paris, and it seemed like everybody you ran into had an English accent.
Well, it's like in Avengers, Thor, who is supposed to be the Norse god of thunder. Yeah, Australian accent. English. I mean, he's Australian, but most people will confuse it incorrectly with English, and he makes some attempts to hide it because I've heard his actual voice, and it's a lot more Aussie, but it's kind of a like, oh, I guess Thor's an Englishman. But even in the comics, he uses a lot of English prose back in the old Kirby days and all that kind of stuff. So that's not outside the realm of of what you're talking about, I don't
Yeah.
think.
So my thing is that, again, and this goes to the thing of the romantic vision of the Old West versus a more historically accurate one. You know, and again, I'm not well steeped in Old West history, but what I have heard and read about is that the variety of accents was numerous in the Old West. Because I mean, at this time, America was still being built by immigrants from all kinds of different European nations.
And even Asian nations, because one of the things that the sheriff says in the first
Mm.
few minutes of the movie is the
And
anti-Chinese nationalist union or something like that. It's one of those, like,
yeah,
it kind of struck me as odd because I know in that time frame the Chinese were shipped in to build the railroads and
hmm
that sort of thing. So,
but you know, here's the thing though with the Chinese, and I don't mean to say this in a mean or derogatory sense, is that, you know, Hollywood, you have an Asian person in a Western, and they're gonna put some stereotypical, sometimes derogatory accent on him or her. That's not the issue I'm speaking of. But it's a, you know, among the Caucasian characters. I mean, you know, you had English, German, Irish, even French people, you know, and they all had their various accents and everything. And that's the thing. I wonder if you actually had a Western that was accurate to that, would it confuse the hell out of viewers?
I'm trying to think if there were any that did that. I know, and this is going to sound silly, but Back to the Future 3, you had Seamus McFly, and they had a nice Irish accent, and they were just farmers in Hill Valley, California, or the California Territory, Mr. McFly, or Mr. Eastwood. So they kind of captured that. What was it? Far and Away, that Tom Cruise, Nicole
Oh
Kidman
yeah,
star vehicle.
I remember that.
They were Irish, and they had the
Mm.
heavy Irish accents, or as much as they
Yeah,
could
and
affect
and
them.
again, not to sound argumentative, but you know, I mean that they were the focus of the movie.
And that was kind of my point. I mean, aside from the Back to the Future piece, which was Michael J. Fox playing, three different characters or whatnot,
Hmm.
it did capture that to a degree and show that. So there was a little more emphasis on that. But I don't know that I've seen one that does what you're talking about, where everyone has a different accent. And especially if you go back to like the old John Wayne movies, it was just all,
Hmm.
everybody talking normal for
You know,
the time.
yeah, you know, and again though, it's like the ethnic stereotypes. If it was a character from Mexico, obviously they gave him the stereotypical Mexican accent. The Chinese, you know, the only movie that I saw that really kind of captured where not only were the main characters who were the focus were the ones that had the accent, but a lot of background characters was Gangs in New York, and that wasn't quite a
Okay.
western, but you know, about that time frame, give or take a few
Yeah, just in an
decades.
urban area.
Yeah, they did a decent job of expressing a few different ethnic accents throughout the city. That again, they weren't, you know, but like I said, like, it's just I just wonder like if American audience saw that in a western, you know, where again westerns are generally romanticized, and then there's good American people, you know, with a French accent.
I think that people could handle that. I don't think that they would be shocked and awed, but there is a certain degree of association. And this is, again, going to sound kind of weird, but go back to the 90s and watch a LaserJet printer and listen to the sound that it makes. It'll come out with a dot matrix sound because that's what people associated with printers at the time. So it's an association thing, not necessarily always a directorial or acting choice. It's just like, look, this is what we think of when we think Western, so we're gonna stretch it too far because we want people to focus on this story. I think you can still focus on the story and have somebody with, like you said, a French accent, an Irish accent, a blend of the two.
Yeah.
Yeah, German. I mean, well, the Django Unchained. There was the German doctor.
Oh yeah, that's a perfect example. I mean, you know, granted this wasn't going to be a perfectly historically accurate movie, but yeah, to have a German doctor in there
Mm-hmm.
in in the middle of the old west, I thought that was fantastic. I love that, and of course the actor. Wow.
Oh, he did a great
Oh
job.
yeah,
Absolutely fantastic.
yeah.
But that's really about everything I think I had to say about accents. Did you have anything you wanted to add? Or
Well, I think that's that's a kind of a good segue to talk a little bit more about the historical accuracy of this film. I mean, as we said before, it's the balance between the romance and the factuality of. I don't know, factuality, is that a word?
It is today.
It is today. Sounds good. The factual nature of this film. I've referenced before Nick Hodges in his YouTube channel, History Buffs, that he likes this movie, and surprisingly to me is that this movie got a lot of the history correct. There wasn't a whole lot of the romance involved in this movie.
I was unaware of that. I mean, I just assumed that there was some fact, some made up Hollywood stuff, but it's kind of the same thing that when we talked about My Cousin Vinny, when you sit there looking at it and going, well, this can't be real. They can't use this as a real thing. And it turns out that, yeah, My Cousin Vinny is used by lawyers, as we discussed. So I'm not surprised that this is pretty historically accurate, but not surprised a lot. How about that?
Yeah, it does seem, though, the things that they didn't get right is one of those things that we always say in Hollywood, it's forgivable because, again, movies are primarily made to turn a buck.
Sure.
And a lot of the inaccuracies are the portrayal of the main characters, i.e. the omission of a lot of their character flaws. One in particular that really got me is that, was it Doc Holliday, I guess harbored a little bit of anti-Semitism. It was that which caused the falling out between him and Wyatt Earp. It was some sort of anti-Semitic comment made, and Wyatt Earp just could not find that tolerable and everything. So there wasn't that heartfelt parting company when Doc Holliday died of tuberculosis.
Yeah.
It was more to that, you son of a bitch, get the hell out of my life,
Yeah, so Wyatt Earp wasn't Jewish, and I'm not saying that forgives what Doc Holliday was saying, but
it was over who Wyatt Earp was, for lack of a better term, dating at the time.
Oh, the young lady. Because from what I understand, I mean, in the closing verbiage, he and the lady, Dana Delaney's character, I've forgotten her name, were married and lived the rest of their days together in L.A., I think, or out that neck of the woods.
Yeah, it's that is correct. That Wyatt Earp did spend the end of his days in Los Angeles. And just a little tangent, it's such a weird thing. He died in the 1920s. Here's something of the Old West, and you think, wow, that was like 100 years ago. But no, not really. The Old West kind of really melded into the 20th century. As it waned away, it faded a little bit.
I'm just curious, and I know this is not related to the historical accuracies, but just it raises that weird question of how must it have felt for these people who grew up in the age of horses and wagons to see the beginnings of industrialization and flight and all of the things that occurred in the very early 20th century, World War I, and the differences between that war and, for our purposes, the Civil War. The beginnings of horseless carriages, cars. The 20s, cars were starting to be a big thing. Radio. It's so intriguing because we look now at our youth and go, oh, back then we had to, have a corded phone and we couldn't get more than, 3 feet away from the phone without it falling off the desk. And, we'd fax machine. What's that?
Off the desk, man. Their phones were attached to the wall.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just so interesting to think about that in the scale of technological changes, because we've always had phones, we've always had television. Now it's gotten better, and now we're carrying our phones and the entire internet in our pocket.
Well,
but
I think if you want to get a hint of what you're trying to imagine, is just look at people complaining on social media right now. You see a lot of memes and posts of people, back in my day, we played outside. We did this. We didn't have no social media. We didn't have this. I'm sure that if they had social media back in those times, you would see people complaining about, oh, we had to stand up next to our phones, or we didn't have bicycles.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
It's like we had to clean up after our transportation, not these cars that don't leave anything behind.
And I think the comparison is apt, and every generation thinks that this new technology is going to destroy the world or is changing the world so much. And I think you had posted a meme on Facebook on your personal page that had people in like the 1950s reading the paper on the bus. And
everybody's reading their own newspaper, not talking to each other.
Yeah, and then in the 70s it was reading a book or something like that, and then now it's everybody's staring at their phone. Like, nothing really changed, just the technology by which we isolate ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And what it is that we're actually complaining about. But we're still complaining.
We always complain. Every generation looks at history through rose-colored glasses and says, it was so much better when I was young. It was a simpler time. Like, yeah, it was a simpler time. I'll tell you, there's a part of me that wants to go back to my youth when the only thing I had to do was go to school and not worry about who was going to buy the food and who was going to frickin' pay the bills. It was pretty simple. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I got into an argument about the simpler times, and to try to kind of bring it back to the times of the Old West. Yeah, those times were pretty simple. You caught a cold, you died. Real simple.
Yeah. You caught the tuberculosis and you died.
You just died. It's as simple as that.
And now we have a cure. So
yeah, it's been a kind of a long contention that every new generation is the worst generation ever.
Sure.
And you
sure.
can trace.
I complain about my kids all the time.
And again, to bring it back around, I mean, I think that's why I take such stock in whether movies are historically accurate, because it's a sad fact that a lot of people get their history from movies, and that's where a lot of myths develop. And
absolutely.
When you're dealing with a Western that's already inherently full of myth and legend, I'm not going to say you should really be careful, but someone who really cares to know the history and know where they came from, and they proclaim to say, well, that's my heritage. My family, built this country in the Old West and this and that. Those were the good old days. It's important to know that the good old days weren't that great.
There were aspects of the good old days that were good, but it's just like now. There's some that was good, some that is bad, and a whole lot of it is just mediocre. It's just there. It goes to what I think I talked about earlier, is the cut scene where Wyatt Earp is chasing down the cowboys. And it's all cut from one horse chase to a shooting scene, to another horse chase, to a shooting scene. Not to be that guy, but traveling by horse isn't exactly fast. And getting in my car and chasing somebody down all the way across town, that's at least a half an hour where I live. And I know it's longer in Los Angeles, so we get this romantic notion that everything was, just happening, and it's not. It's like, it took you 3 days to go find somebody by horse, and then you had 2 minutes worth of, we'll call it excitement, but 2 minutes worth of gunplay or whatever, and then another 3 days to go find the next person. And maybe you had to backtrack and go back to your starting point and do another 3 days in the opposite direction. So everyone gets this idea that things just, happened immediately, and they don't even happen immediately now.
Yeah, it's funny when somebody talks about a 20-minute drive here in Los Angeles. It's like, yeah, that's just to go down the street to the store.
I was going to say, you just driving 3 blocks? What are you doing?
Yeah, pretty much. It's funny, too, when you talk about the distances and the time it took to travel in the Old West. And I'm reminded of another Western movie, and it was, forgive me that I don't remember the name of it because it was not one of the movies that I liked in particular, but it was with Drew Barrymore and Madeline Stowe? About the female cowboys.
Yeah, I remember which movie you're talking about. I don't remember
Bad
the name.
Girls or something. I forget the title.
So
forgive me. Like I said, it just wasn't one of my favorite movies. But I just remember at the end of it, there was a line where the Pinkertons are looking for them because they're basically outlaw women, and the Pinkertons are looking for them, and they're asking these two men on a wagon And they say, "Have you seen anybody?" He's like, "Oh, I haven't seen anybody for days. Even this horse is starting to look good to me." But right there, just perfectly illustrates exactly what you're saying. It's like these guys are just transporting some stuff in their wagon, and I haven't seen anybody for days.
Yeah, and the name of the movie was Bad Girls, but
It was Bad Girls?
I know it was. I know, and kind of staying on the history, but just sort of staying in that period. My hometown in Oregon is the end of the old Oregon Trail, and so there's a lot of history in the town, and there's a museum about the Oregon Trail and about the history of the county and that sort of thing. And it was, like a 9-month to a year-long trip, if not more, to get from St. Louis to Oregon. I can hop in a plane and do that in 4 hours now. So I get it, we move a lot faster, but by the same token, everyone's lives are long periods of monotony punctuated by short periods of excitement. And that's what movies do, but again, because they only have so much time to tell the story, it's exceptionally quick. To the historical accuracy of this movie, the only thing that I specifically looked up, because you and I had sort of discussed this beforehand, that you were going to talk about it extensively, was there was a grave marker that apparently really existed, and it was something about the guy that getting shot by the 45 or not or whatever. The movie was set 3 years earlier than that tombstone would have actually been there, and I thought, who cares? I mean, it's a nice piece of trivia, I get that, but is it really that important that it pulled you out of the movie? Like, nope, this whole movie is garbage because of that second right there.
Yeah, and again, it's, us being in the military, we know that mantra, attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, when it comes to movies, yeah, details are important. I'm not saying they're not, but that particular one, yeah. It's the same thing we discussed earlier. It's not that big of a deal. I didn't even notice it until somebody mentioned it.
Same here.
It's not like the movie 10,000 BC is supposed to be Neanderthal men and they stumble upon pyramids.
Yeah,
okay, that's a little bit more significant. But again, that's not something we'd call a detail either. But no, I'm totally with you on that. It's not important. It just is like talking about personality deficiencies.
Right.
Wyatt Earp was kind of a bastard. I'm not a motherless child. I mean, I'm saying he was kind of an asshole.
Well, you do get that feeling in this movie.
Yeah, but, it's like the scene where he walks into the casino and takes it
Yeah,
over.
and I've spoken about that earlier, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those details that really happened. He did take somebody, rough him up, throw him out, took over the casino. There was a little bit more to it, but again, I'm not going to go into too many details of what historically happened and why that was significant. But that event where he took somebody, threw him out of the casino, that happened. But it wasn't like we watched the movie and we think, yeah, that's good old Western justice. He got what he deserved and Wyatt Earp took charge. Yes, man's man. When it was a little bit more of like, Old West, I'm stronger than he is and I'm just going to do what I want. And he did.
Yeah, might makes right.
Yeah, and that's more accurate as to what it was. But, you can't have an audience feel sympathetic to the lawman if he acts like that.
If he's doing bad things, yeah.
I mean, there was other things where he ran a brothel, I think, at one time. I think it's where he met one of his wives. So, again, modern audiences probably wouldn't like the character if that's the way he was. Or if they knew that, I should say.
Yeah, people are much more nuanced than movie representations will permit, especially, again, given the time and given the intent of the movie. If the movie is built to show that Wyatt Earp was a bastard, then they will focus heavily on that piece. But this is more the story of the shootout at the OK Corral and how they got to that point and the interaction between the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday. Again, even fictionalized.
Yeah, and then it's just, the overall theme of the taming of the Old West, bringing law and order, everything. But, this really brings up a question here. This is, not even part of preparation. It's just I just comes to mind. Do you think it'd be more of the Hollywood audiences that would be like, oh, we just don't like this character? Or do you think there would be more backlash from the Wyatt Earp fans who, people who read, old westerns and everything, and who think Wyatt Earp's a hero, and you see a movie that portrays him that, albeit more historically accurate, but doesn't paint him in the best light, there'd be, I mean, you've seen the backlash when people suggested Christopher Columbus wasn't quite the hero that he is portrayed to be.
I was just thinking the same thing, and it goes to something that I was actually thinking about earlier today, was the Founding Fathers, and how people will use that argument to support insert name of cause celeb here. It doesn't really matter what it is, but they'll say, well, this is not what the Founding Fathers meant. And my usual response to that is, which ones? Because they all had different ideas. George Washington had an idea of what he wanted to do as president. Thomas Jefferson had an idea of what he wanted to do as president. Alexander Hamilton, who recently had a very famous musical made about him, was of a different mind. So here you have three significant founding fathers. John Adams was similar to Jefferson, but had a more realistic streak. But when you listen to people discuss the histories of the actual individuals, the personalities, and all of the things that most people don't see because they read what they read in the history books, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. He created the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and he owned slaves. And he was a racist. He believed that European Americans were superior to the savages that they were bringing to their shores. But by the same token, he also recognized that slavery was an institution that needed to go away. So it's the intricacy of the man that is far more interesting to me than just the historical facts. I'm a huge fan of Thomas Jefferson, and I struggle to reconcile the disparate natures of his statements regarding the Tree of Liberty being watered with the blood of patriots and his slave ownership as an example. He was a brilliant person. He designed Monticello. That's his home. Built, or not, he didn't build it, obviously somebody else did. But but he designed the home and all of the things in it, the columns, the arch, or the dome rather, that was all him. But again, he may or may not, history is not necessarily clear. It is clear through DNA evidence that A. Jefferson had relations with A. Hemings, and the current popular train of thought is that it was Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And you would be hard-pressed to disprove it because obviously we weren't there, but by the same token, that calls into question his morality. Does that outweigh the good that he did? When he created the Declaration of Independence, even outside of this country, it is widely recognized as a seminal document in the history of the Enlightenment and moving forward to understand the freedoms that people should have. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Well, yes, at the time, he meant all men. He did, and mostly all white men. There were free blacks, and maybe he meant them, but you know what I'm saying. So we look at that and we go, that all men are created. He must have meant everyone. Well, maybe he did and maybe he didn't, but now we get to look at it through our lens and say, no, when we use the word men, when I say, or rather when I quote the Declaration of Independence, it is my intent that the word men applies to everyone, to men, women, and anyone else, that all men are created equal. So, looking back at Wyatt Earp, yeah, I think you would have some backlash from the Wyatt Earp fanboys, but I think that a lot of people, probably not people who would vocalize it on social media or through any other means, would probably just accept it as he was a flawed human being who has been cast into legend for the role that he played in cleaning up the Old West by any means necessary. That's just me.
Yeah, I think a number of people, especially the movement of what was it they call revisionist history,
Mm-hmm.
To try to right the wrongs or scrape off the embellishments, scrape off the veneer to get the truth. You bring up an interesting point though, because I think it's like when you talk about Jefferson and then ultimately Wyatt Earp, because we are talking about Tombstone. You don't let his flaws, his character flaws, which every human being has, overshadow his achievements. He cleaned up the Old West, did a lot of great things as a lawman. Kind of was like, okay, yeah, but he was an asshole. He was a bully at times. He did shoot people who probably didn't need to be shot. But, hey, product of his time.
And that's a huge piece of the puzzle, though, is we say that now and go, yeah, it's a product of his time, but if you move forward to now and you see lawmen doing the same things, it is, oh my God, they're corrupt cops. The similarities are there, and I'm not saying it's 100% foolproof argument, but we have evolved in our sensibilities to recognize that that's bad. We don't want our people enforcing the laws to be breaking the laws at the same time.
Yeah, well, part of it, too, is the attitude of, like, who it is they're shooting. It's not, and I'm not directing this to say that they're only shooting one particular type of person. But when they are shooting a particular type of person, back in the Old West, it was like, meh, whatever. To evolving to, well, he was probably doing something wrong. But nowadays, when you still hear that, well, he was probably doing something wrong, to like, well, what? I think that's a relatively new question. What was he doing wrong?
What was he doing so wrong that meant he deserved to die? I mean, was he jaywalking?
Yeah, and I like that phrase that said, it's like, it's not that there's more violence, it's just more obvious.
It's also more visible, which I suppose ties into the more obvious, but because we have the internet in our pocket and cameras on every street corner, and I was at the movie theater the other day, and in the lobby of the movie theater there are 17 cameras, the little bubble domes, and I'm sure there might be a couple of hidden ones that I didn't see, but I was just kind of looking around going, holy crap, there's 17 cameras in here, and it's a good wide open area, but still we can see so much more. Mm-hmm. And then we can look at it and do the dime store psychology analysis, and we can watch it over and over and over again on the news. It's just so much more in your face, which should be there to raise awareness that this is an issue that needs to be solved. But there is a part of it that takes it to the extreme, and I don't want to say this in the dismissive sense of blowing it out of proportion, but if I see the same video 47 times, I'm going to get numb to it eventually. So show me the number of times that it takes to get me to think about it, and then stop, and show it to me less frequently. Like I watched CNN when the bar in Paris got shot up, or the bar, the Pulse in Orlando, and they just kept looping through the same scenes over and over and over again, and it got to the point where, like, I can't watch this anymore. It's just the same thing over and over and over again, and now I'm numb. Now you're not having the same emotional impact. So I think, again, kind of tying this back to what we were talking about and how this relates to Tombstone is, or Wyatt Earp in particular, this is going to be a thing that as people discover the truth about the histories, it starts to permeate through the national psyche that, hey, maybe this guy wasn't as good of a guy as we thought he was, but he did do some good. we'll give him props for that. But you'll always have that vocal minority that's going to say, "You're trying to change history." And we're not. We're just, like you said, peeling back the layers of film that make it seem romantic and pulling off the rose-colored glasses to say, look, it was ugly. There were ugly parts. We have to take the good with the bad.
And that's comes up to the thing that I always keep hearing too. It's like people, like I think we said it already. People talk about the good old days. When you learn, like I said, when you peel back that veneer, when you take off the rose-colored glasses, you really start to question, is like, when were those days?
Yeah. I think our best days are still ahead of us. Knock on wood.
Again, it's because I think it's like, back then, you got a cold, you died. You got certain wounds or something like that, you had to get your leg cut off. And that's just not the case anymore. Polio was a massive killer back in those days.
Yeah, and it's more or less been eradicated.
Nowadays, you ask somebody about it, and they have no idea what you're talking about, which I have mixed emotions about that. It's great that they don't know about it because it's not happening. People aren't dying from it, but people should know some history, It's like, but
I don't know.
But you
got
get
a shot.
you get what I'm saying, though. It's when people talk about the golden age, it's I look at them funny, and the risk of making this political, but it's just like it's relevant. So forgive me, when people say "Make America Great Again," and I've got to ask, what part, what was the characteristic? And it's something that nobody's really ever answered. What part? It's because of this. Because aside from the Old West, the most romanticized time that, at least to me, that I witnessed, is the 1950s. Oh, the simpler times, rock and roll, and the car hop and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, and also the time when that car hop didn't want black people in there, and lynchings were a thing. And it's just like, yeah, that was a great golden time, wasn't it?
Oh, you're just saying that. Like, no, I'm not. Well, okay, I am just saying it, but it actually happened. There were lynchings. So yeah, I agree. It's peeling back that patina of
Ooh, I like that word.
Happiness and saying, yeah, there's ugliness under here. But and I will say to your "Make America Great Again," my response to that statement has always been a little more national pride filled in the when did it stop being great? As much as we have bad stuff going on in our country, it is still one of the best places in the world to live for an opportunity to succeed. Do we have a long ways to go to fix things? Absolutely.
I think with language, it's important to get the right words. I think it's just to say that I grew up always hearing that America's the greatest country in the world, and then always learning that there's reasons to say, no, it isn't. I think, though, the thing that's more accurate is that we have the greatest potential.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. But and that is because, again, the violence that we went through. I mean, again, we're Americans, so our history that was taught to us in school tended to focus on the specifics of American history. Things like Tombstone and Wyatt Earp and the shootout at the OK Corral. Movies have been made about this since they've been making movies. But if you go to Europe or India or anywhere, China, wherever they make movies or wherever they go to school, then they learn about their own history and their own struggles to develop as a society, and they had similar issues. I'll wager they didn't have the Old West in the way that we had it, but I mean, they had to go through guns and horses and trying to get to places and do all that stuff.
Oh yeah,
it was just different.
China had the Mongols and other such bandits to deal with. Yeah, they had their tough times. They had their times of lawlessness.
So I think every society goes through that sort of thing. But again, because we're Americans, we're focused on what we went through, what we're going through.
Well, and that's the thing, too. Coming back to what we were talking about, the romanticizing of the Old West. It's like, well, we really consider that the time when we laid the foundation of building this great nation that we have, not realizing or forgetting that beneath that concrete foundation are the bodies of slaves and the Chinese who built the railroads and the Native Americans whose land we took and pushed them out and sometimes committed outright genocide against them. But hey, look at this nice slab of concrete that we can build our homes on now.
Yeah, we got a parking lot over here.
Yeah. But real quick, I'd like to go back before we start closing out and everything. And the point I was going to make before we really jumped off on this last thread here, we were talking about the character flaws not overshadowing the achievements. For you were talking about Jefferson. I was bringing it back around, talking about Wyatt Earp. And of course, Hollywood also focusing on the achievements because they want a likable character. They want people to sit down in the theaters and, pay money for tickets and popcorn and everything. But when you have a figure like Christopher Columbus, who we say discovered America, brought civilization to a savage land and everything. Yeah, I'm looking at you. You're rolling your eyes and everything. And it's like, but that's what I was taught in school. And I'm sure a lot of other people considering
as was I
when it came to light that no, this guy was he never actually landed on the North American continent. He was a genocidal maniac who took slaves and killed people who got in his way and everything. The backlash against that was harsh. A lot of people were very angry. So at what point though do you say, okay, I'm willing to accept that, Wyatt Earp acted in a bad way, but it still doesn't change the fact that he did this, versus somebody who credits a historical figure like Columbus with things that he never actually did and considers him a great man even though he was far from it. Where exactly do we draw that line?
I don't have a good answer. I don't. There's a couple of things that come into play for me. As you were saying this, I was kind of thinking ahead to my response, which is a bad listening technique. Listeners, don't think to your response. Listen to the words and then craft a response. I edit out a lot of pauses when we think about what we're going to say next. So, anyway, what I was thinking about, though, is when we were instructors together and when before we each went to our instructor tour, we went through basic instructor training. And one of the things that I learned that makes sense in every aspect of life, not just a teaching position, is the law of primacy. That which is learned first is learned best. Right or wrong, it doesn't matter. If you learn how to do something wrong the first time, it takes more time to unlearn that way and learn the proper way than it would have taken you to just learn how to do it right in the first place. If we apply that to what we have been taught in history, then we have to give the time on the back end for these corrections and omissions to seep their way into the historical consciousness. We have to change the history books so that moving forward our children are taught the correct thing, but we also have to be willing to look at what our children are being taught and say, oh, okay, that's not the way I learned it, but this really did happen. Or accepting at least the possibility that this was the way things occurred and that we've been getting it wrong for so long. Because until we get a time machine and we can go back and actually be there, you can look at the logs for some things, but the words that Wyatt Earp uses in a personal conversation between he and his wife, we'll never know those. Those are made up. Those are something that we kind of have to deal with as historical fiction. But you look at, like what you were talking about, the interaction when Wyatt Earp went into the Oriental. In the movie, it's this way, and people will learn that first because that's the first time they've probably ever heard of Wyatt Earp going into the casino. They just learned about Wyatt Earp cleaning up the Old West. So now this is their truth. And we have to accept that that's not the real truth. Like you said, sometimes people just learn their history from movies, and that sucks.
Yeah. The fact that movies, for people similar to us, strikes up conversations. I mean, we started this conversation talking about the movie Tombstone, and we've look at the directions we've gone.
But they're all pertinent because, again, like I wrapped up that last statement, this is a movie about a historical event that takes creative liberties with the events that are not actually recorded or observed by someone. So, it's still pertinent to the discussion, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, I kind of enjoyed the tangent, and it still stayed relevant to the topic of discussion. Unlike some of our other tangents, which are... I don't know where we went to with that, but let's bring it back to the movie.
Yeah, it's funny. We always reference our tangents as to going down the rabbit hole. And I don't know, did we go down any rabbit holes during the Alice in Wonderland, or is that the one we pretty much stayed on topic the entire time?
I think we went down a couple of rabbit holes, but they weren't that deep.
Yeah. That's irony. I know like people don't know how to use irony, but that's irony.
Irony and hyperbole are two of my favorite things, so there.
Yeah.
So did that cover what you wanted to? I mean, I know we didn't speak specifically to some of the historical inaccuracies, except for that one Tombstone thing.
The funny thing is I had prepared to talk about all these little details, but, when we really thought about it, again, certain details like the actual tombstone with the guy, it's like, it's not that important. And you know what, though? That's the other thing is, I like to promote Nick Hodges' History Buffs channel on YouTube, and I hope, people go and listen to it, because it's a great channel. If you're really interested in movies and history, that's the place for you to go. So check it out.
Cool. I'm a fan of, or I used to be a fan of, I just kind of got away from it, Dan Carlin?
Yes.
Is that the guy's name?
Yeah.
Yeah, he does some really great history podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
On that note, though, I do want to say, listeners, if you're going to make a choice between, him or us, we prefer you stay with us. We're a lot more fun. Dan's nodding his head in agreement.
Yeah, I don't really have anything witty to add to that, other than just, yes, do what he says.
Yes,
Follow.
Listen to us. We will speak to you in low, soothing tones.
Yes. So, I don't own this movie. I don't own a copy of it just yet. But you do. Where does it go on your shelf?
I think I sort of led to where it would go on my shelf in the beginning when I said I wasn't really the biggest fan of this. It's a good movie. It's not top shelf for me. It's really second shelf. Pretty solid second shelf. It's a well-made movie. It's well acted. Again, I mentioned earlier that some of the actors that I don't generally care for are in this movie, and I liked them in this movie. So, yeah, I think it's a solid second shelf. That's where I would put it. If you did own it, where would you put it?
It would probably go on general population. I'd probably own a special edition that had a lot of features on it. Which one do you own? Just
the regular DVD.
Just a regular standard, just a movie and nothing else?
Yep. Although, I will say, I didn't have to flip this one over, so I was pretty excited about that part. All right, so we've covered everything, figured out where it's going to go on our shelves, and it is now time to press the random magic movie button. And are you ready?
Ready.
I'm sorry, I didn't have the volume turned up. How do you feel about The Usual Suspects? And I don't say that in the sense of, like, how do you feel about it now? Because we're going to find out, because that's what our next movie is.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, hey, that's what it is. That's what it is.
Yeah. Do you own it?
No. Oh, wait.
Really?
I might.
The Usual Suspects?
I don't think I do.
That's a fantastic movie.
Yeah, it is. I'll have to double check, but...
Okay.
All
right. So, yeah, listeners, you can reach us on our Facebook page at Facebook, WRIOS. You can email us at WRIOS2016mr@gmail.com. And you can leave us a review on iTunes and all the other assorted podcasting apps of choice. We appreciate your time. And Dan, do you have a movie-themed goodbye this episode?
Yeah, I'll be your Huckleberry.
See, and good call, because we opened it with a Daisy If You Do. So, all right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks with The Usual Suspects. Oh, and point of note, that will be our 29th episode, and that will lead into our 30th episode, which will be a random listener request. So send in those listener requests.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. See you in 2 weeks.